Hey, what's going on? It's Pete with BackDraft Bikes. Today is exhaust day for the GS Adventure. Let's go. Welcome back to the channel. Just got back from Key West, did an epic ride on my GS here, but it is too quiet. And who doesn't want a little more power? I was able to source a full titanium exhaust system, header, mid-pipe, and an Aero slip-on for this bike. So I cannot wait to see what this sounds like. But before I get started with the installation, I want you to hear the stock sound. So here we go. All right, let's get the bikes in position and get this show on the road. I scoured the internet looking for how-to videos on this, and I didn't really find any, so I'm like, hey, I should shoot one. Here's a disclaimer. I'm doing this for the first time on this bike, so although I do have experience working on bikes, use this information at your own risk. Let me show you the parts I got. That's the heel guard with the hardware, the beautiful Aero slip-on. You know what makes a good muffler? When you can see straight through it. That's what I'm talking about. Oh my word. Look at this beauty. So light.
Excellent!
So this is the complete Aero system. And actually the instructions it comes with are for the 1200 GS, but I mean, there's not much difference, right? Homoglated collectors and the slip-on. For this deal, we're going to be removing the flapper valve, so we're going to get a check engine light because of that. It's not going to see the servo. We're going to handle that later with a flash. So the first thing is first, let's remove the original OEM heat shield, which is right here. A couple bolts on this, T25. Step two, remove the OE muffler mount, T40. Next, we're going to remove the clamp bolt. I think they call them Jubilee clamps in Britain, but 13 millimeters. And this baby should come right out now. Wiggle, 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 wiggle. 9. Next, we're going to take the cover off of the servo motor. Unplug the exhaust valve harness, oxygen sensor harness, and remove the screw securing the exhaust valve servo motor. This is the plug for the servo motor. You pull it out and then pull it out and then you push down. There we go. So that's unplugged. The screws that hold this together are kind of funky. Yes, it appears to be that is the screw right there. That is a T30 and that goes right here. Make sure it's seated. Then this thing just slides forward because it's got two little grommets on it. Wallace and grommet. There's another plug right here. There we go. There we go. And that's going to end up going like this. But we'll leave that just there for a second. All right, the next thing we're going to do is pull off the skid plate or whatever excuse they call this thing. And again, T30s. Next, you're going to remove the front belly pan mounting bracket, which again is the T30s. There's a couple cable ties that secure the OE oxygen sensors in. They actually are just clips. You can pull them straight down. Don't cut it. Okay, I will say one thing, as a little tip, these connectors are awful. And this thing is jammed way up underneath there. What you have to do is you have to use a screwdriver to release the inside piece right here. See how there's like a little tab on it? And then this will slide forward, and then you can disconnect the two pieces. It's really, really difficult to get to. That's the other end of it. Next step is to remove these 3 bolts that secure the headers to the cylinder head, and those are 11 millimeter. The last one's a little tricky, so I actually use a wrench to get to it. Now we got to do the same thing for the other side. Now here's a little tip to help you save from getting everything scratched up. The lower engine crash bars actually are quite in the way of dropping this pipe because of the way that the cylinder head is mounted. So what I would recommend doing is loosening up the crash bar and swinging it forward. Let me show you how this works. You're going to take a T40 and you're going to come in here, bend the fog light out of the way, loosen this, and then the T50 is going to go on the lower piece here, and then right here as well. Now the bolt that's really hard to get to on these is the one that's way up there. You don't have to get to that though, because since we have this loosened, all we have to do is carefully just bend it out and pry it forward. And as you can see, that gives us a ton of room to get at the pipe. It's not necessarily a requirement, but it makes things a lot easier. Now, what I like to do is put a nut on this pipe just a little bit, because we're going to break this seal and drop everything down. There's one more bracket that you need to take off. It's right here. And that's a T40. This should be ready to come out now. Just like that. And I have this nut up here that's holding this in partially, so I'm just going to unwind that and then drop it down. On the other side, you've got an oxygen sensor as well, so we're going to have to cut these cable ties so that this will give us enough room. This is, again, this clip that just pops in place. This allows us to get to the oxygen sensor. Okay. So the cable tie just slides in there, so I can replace that, and I'll use that anchor point. So I'm just going to unwind this O2 sensor right here. I'm just going to unwind this from the socket here. This is way too difficult to take out. This wiring harness goes way around the other side. I don't really want to deal with that. 22 millimeter. I got it. And it looks like we just kind of fiddle with this to get it out the rest of the way. Awesome. There she is. She's out. Now that we have this all out, we do have to swap over a few pieces and parts. Obviously, the O2 sensor that I didn't take off, which is going to be on the right side of the bike, I've got to put in. The exhaust bracket, mounting bracket's got to come off and be put back in. And then the instructions, also this O2 sensor as well. And then the instructions also talk about the servo motor. And what they want me to do is take the cap off of it and basically remove the cables from it and then reinstall this back on the bike. That's going to work for the check engine light from coming on, but I really don't think that's going to work, because I think the CAN bus system in this actually can sense current draw from the motor, and that's how it's going to know there's a problem with it. But I'm going to do what the instructions say, like a good boy. Yeah. T20 for these bolts right here. This is an expensive part. We don't want to mess it up. So you can see the pieces here. These cables, you just spin them and they come out. Boom. Now we're going to pull these out. So these pop straight out like this. And then it wants us to reinstall this. Going to set this whole piece right over here, get it out of the way. Okay, we got to pull the, also got to pull the O2 sensors out of this one. So don't get these confused. The 22 is the big one. The downstream O2 sensor is a 17 millimeter, so it's a little smaller. Be very careful with these. You don't want to break them. They're ceramic inside. It's good practice to put a little never seize on these. Snugged it. The weight difference between these pipes and what was on the bike is incredible. So we got the bracket on there as well. So we're going to put the other O2 sensor in here. Now, because I twisted this before, I've got to be really careful that I have it untwisted for starting, which is right about there. And I know it might have been a little bit easier to do this without it being on the bike, but that cable harness goes way back. So we're just going to do this. Look at that, huh? I like it. Okay, the instructions are now telling me to put the OE bracket, exhaust bracket, back in place. I'm going to reassemble this with blue Loctite, and I like these sticks because they work really well. Then it wants us to secure this up into the frame where it was before, which is going to be like this. And then there's one bolt. Now this piece can fit in here. We can plug it in. We can plug this back in. Make sure it clicks into place. That's good. That is mounted back where it's supposed to be. And I'm going to go to the next step, which is where we put the headers and crossover pipe together and put them on the bike using the OE nuts. And I'll do the same thing on the other side. Now, it's a good idea not to tighten everything down. Let it loose, because that will allow you to be able to position everything in place correctly. And then you can start tightening things up. So our next thing we do is we're going to maneuver this into place. And this might be a little tricky with the center stand, but we can do it. We got it. See, leaving these loose is the key. Oh, yeah. And we got to make sure we get that top support in. There it is. There it is. Oh, like a glove. Yeah, that's awesome. That's right in there. The next step is to secure the pieces together with a spring. And these things are a real pain. I like to use a long screwdriver. But, I mean, these things can be pretty deadly. So be careful. Ah, there we go. Other side as well. Next thing we want to do is put the belly pan holder piece back on, and I am going to do a little Loctite. Again, the blue Loctite, because everything on this thing shakes and shimmies. We don't want to have a problem with nuts and bolts falling out. Now that we got everything locked in place, everything's where it needs to be, I'm going to go ahead and tighten up the nuts for the headers. Next thing we got to do is connect all of our connectors back up and then get the crash bars rotated back into place. And then we'll rotate these back down into place. And just be careful not to scratch up the paint when you're doing so. It's kind of tedious to get it into place. Make sure you use Loctite on these because these things take a wicked beating. Also, make sure you put all the bolts in place before you tighten them up, because crash bars are notorious for being a little bit tweaked. Now we'll do the same thing on the other side. Now it wants us to put the belly pan back on. So we're going to use our T27s again. I like to start the back one first because I can see it. Get a couple threads in. Do another one. Don't over tighten these. The next step is putting on the slip-on, which is, to me, a very exciting part. This is pretty straightforward. So it looks good there. So there's no isolation piece in between the aftermarket aero can and the frame, which is not good. I don't like that. What I'm actually going to do is take a small piece of rubber and cut it to fit. Okay, so here's what I did. I took the factory OE mount and I just sliced the edges off of it. And I was going to use this foam that I have, but this would just disintegrate eventually, so I'd rather use the real deal. Going to put it on here like this. Make a little bit of a sandwich. So that's going to go in there. And then this piece is going to go on here. And I'm actually going to use the OE nut as well. No one will ever know. And to me, that seems a lot better. I like that a lot better. Okay, now the last thing we got to do is just tighten up the clamp here, and there's a carbon fiber foot peg thing that goes on. And this is your foot shield, which clips on here like this. I don't know if you can see that. Say right about there is the neutral position. Ever so tight, gently. We're going to tighten these up. So that's on there. And now I've got to tighten up this clamp. Last thing to do is fire it up and see how it sounds. Where's the key? Wow. All right, so just a quick take on this exhaust now that the install is done and I've ridden it for a little bit. It's definitely louder. Not obnoxious, but louder. The other thing I really noticed a lot right off the bat is there's way more snap right off the line. There's that little lag that used to be there is gone. When the shift can kicks in, it does make a little bit of a pop as well, so that's kind of cool. But besides for that, time will tell. No check engine lights either right now, so plugging in the servo motor must have been the trick. I like it. Until next time, folks, ride safe.